Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for dialing in. We'll be starting the webinar shortly. Welcome everyone, and welcome to the launch event of the Scaling Circularity report presented by Global Fashion Agenda. And we're delighted to have you all here joining this 1-hour webinar today, where I'll be presenting the key learnings out of the report and the messages and talking to the Circular Fashion Partnership, which was used as a case study for this collaboration with McKinsey & Co. On the agenda today, we'll start with a word of welcome from Peder Michael Pruzan-Jorgensen, the Interim Chief Impact Officer at Global Fashion Agenda. Then we'll go on to a concise presentation of the Scaling Circularity report by Corinne, Associate Partner at McKinsey & Company, and Holly Syrett, Impact Programs and Sustainability Director at Global Fashion Agenda. Then we'll spend the most of our time during a panel discussion with journalists Jasmin, Malik, Chua from Sourcing Journal, and 4 key experts that will be reflecting on the report findings. We'll end this 60-minute session with closing remarks from Mr. Faiyaz Murshid Kazi, who's the Director General of West Europe and the European Union at the Bangladesh Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This session is being recorded and will be published afterwards, and we invite you to ask questions to our presenters and panelists during the session using the chat box. We'll do our best to ask questions or to otherwise revert back after the meeting has taken place. So with no further ado, I will now hand over to Peder Michael Pruzan-Jorgensen, who's the Interim Chief Impact Officer at Global Fashion Agenda. Welcome, Peder Michael. It seems we have some technical difficulties, so if you could just bear with us one moment, we'll be logging Peder Michael in for his opening words. Thank you for your patience.
Hi, Holly, this is Peder Michael here.
Fantastic. Thank you for joining us.
It works. Okay, thank you so much for that. Well, so let me just restart and say good morning, good afternoon to everyone. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to welcome you all, and obviously grateful that so many of you have chosen to dial in for this event. I think it shows that this is a topic that industry insiders and outsiders alike see great potential in. We certainly do at the Global Fashion Agenda. Before I say a few words about today's report, let me just express a few additional words of gratitude. So first and foremost, of course, to our strategic knowledge partner, McKinsey & Co., with whom this report wouldn't have been possible. We're delighted by this partnership and sees lots of promise in this particular area as well, working with McKinsey. Secondly, I do want to say a big thank you to everyone involved in the Circular Fashion Project in Bangladesh. It's manufacturers, recyclers, brands, reverse resources, the Bangladesh Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and many other local actors in Bangladesh. I think, as you will see, that it's very much the combination of the big picture perspectives that this report offers, combined with the on-the-ground experiences that I think at least make this report particularly valuable and also gives us hope that we can finally move this big agenda forward. And then thirdly, I want to say a special thank you to P4G, Partnership for Growth, who has provided guidance and invaluable funding to the project in Bangladesh. I think we all know that we are still at a stage where we need funders with foresight and risk appetite, but also, as the report shows, we're now at a stage where we can rapidly move forward to scaling and commercialization. The launch of today's report, I think, marks an important milestone in the fashion industry's journey to becoming sustainable. It shows that there is a huge potential in circularity. And I think more importantly, because the potential has always been there, but it also shows the feasibility of realizing this potential. And that's the watershed that we're looking at right now. Circularity is, I guess we can all agree, fashionable these days, but it is a lot more than that. It is a necessity. The fashion industry will not be able to deliver on the Paris Agreement's objectives without fully embracing circularity. It is needed to get on a 1.5 degrees pathway. It's also necessary for a variety of other reasons, including protecting biodiversity, reducing pollution, protecting water resources, and also to ensure a more equitable distribution of value creation. And I think this latter point is something that we don't always pay enough attention to, but it is important. And it's why the project in Bangladesh is important. We have to ensure that as we transition to a low carbon circular economy, that it creates jobs and income that is more equitably distributed also in developing and emerging markets. Circularity has, as I just said, long held a promise and a hope. But I think if we are honest, we have to recognize that while other industries have made significant progress, the fashion industry has struggled a bit more getting off the ground. And there are lots of reasons for this. It's about policy frameworks that are not there. It's about the technology that's only now really being commercialized. It's about reverse logistics, consumer attitudes, it's design imperatives, it's cost, and it's a lot of other things that have made it difficult. And then there is the silver bullet paradox. It is ironic that the more we focus on the big opportunity, looking for the key that can unlock it all, the less likely we are to make progress, because there is no one key that can unlock it all. It is a series of steps, it's a wide set of actors, and it's a diversity of partnerships and collaborations. And I think this is why this report and the project in Bangladesh gives me hope. We're taking a pragmatic approach. We're zooming in on the potential of reusing post-industrial waste. And yes, recycling post-industrial waste into new fibers will not make the fashion industry circular in and by itself, but it is a key to one door that we must pass through. And it is, importantly, a door that will inevitably open other doors and give access. So let me just end here by saying that as we go through those doors, we need more partners. We need more brands committed to using recycled fibers. We need more manufacturers who sees the value in waste, because waste is truly waste. We need more recyclers. We need more investors that are seeing the commercial potential in scaling up this industry. We need conducive policy frameworks that makes all this possible. And finally, we need the new types of collaboration that we have seen in Bangladesh, what we have referred to as pre-competitive collaboration. That type of partnering and collaboration is really critical at the stage we're at now, but will and should eventually give way to a more traditional market-based way of working together, so that true value is created throughout the value chain on this. I think the conversation that will follow now will show some of these potentials. It will address some of the barriers, but also show us, importantly, how we can overcome some of those barriers. So with that, thank you very much. And I hope you will enjoy the next almost 1 hour. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter Michael, and thank you for bearing with us as we sorted out our technical difficulties. So we now transition to a presentation of the key findings of the report. My name's Holly Syrett. I work as the Impact Programs and Sustainability Director at Global Fashion Agenda. And I've been delighted to work with the McKinsey team on the development of this report, and especially with Corinne, Sora's associate partner at McKinsey & Company. And she and I will be walking you through a few of the key messages.
Hi. I've tried to turn my video on, but it doesn't seem to be working. I think there might be a...
Oh, okay, well...
But it doesn't matter. You don't need to see my face.
I rather would. Let's see if we can sort it out on our end. But I will get us started with the whole premise and the thinking behind the report in the first place. This ties in a little bit to what Peter Michael was talking to, really that we, of course, coming off the back of COP26, but also the Textile Exchange Conference, see how the fashion industry has an incredibly large impact on the environment and on climate, but also has a large potential to abate the emissions, reduce its resource intensity, and really transition to a more sustainable industry. Circularity is seen as a buzzword, and there's a lot of talk about setting targets on circular systems, but we really wanted to prove these concepts out and do work on the ground. And part of the background behind this was when we really looked at where did the fashion industry contribute to carbon emissions last year. We published a report called Fashion on Climate, where we really zoomed into the full fashion value cycle and pinpointed where the majority of emissions are currently caused, seeing that almost 40% of that is in material production. And we know that we need to decouple from the use of virgin resources. So this really tied into us exploring what the potential is to capture what is currently considered as waste stream, recycle that back into a new material. And this is really the premise behind the Circular Fashion Partnership and really part of how this report came together. We also see that more and more, of course, very recently, the UNFCCC Charter for Fashion was signed again and updated during COP, with over 105 companies setting targets to really look at science-based targets and how they can reduce their emissions. And as Global Fashion Agenda, working with McKinsey, developing all of these beautiful reports, hearing lots and lots of brands set these targets. There's one thing between publishing and talking about these activities, and another thing actually implementing them. And that's what we hope to encourage and work towards more with this work. So this was a little bit of the premise behind the report and the context that we felt was important to include. I'll hand over now to Corinne. Let's see if we can get your video up and running.
It's all right, it doesn't matter. Very good to see everyone today. So just a recap on, we supported the fantastic work Global Fashion Agenda has led with some analytical work on understanding the importance of recycling. And actually, recycling is currently subscale in textiles. About 1% of total textiles are sort of textile to textile recycled, circular. But actually, based on existing technologies, we could, if we massively scaled the infrastructure and design, get to around 65% of total textiles recycled back into loop. And that being 80% of the three main fabrics, which is cellulosics, cotton, and polyester. So there's huge potential with actually our existing technologies. So we need to unlock the barriers to this potential. We need to work out what the policy, investment, infrastructure, and incentive barriers could be unlocked. Just the next page. So here's an overview of the sort of 5 main buckets of types of recycling. I'll walk through them very quickly. There's a lot more detail on these sort of in the report and generally out there. Mechanical fiber to fiber helps convert cotton into cotton, but unfortunately it loses some of the quality output, and this is already well scaled. Regenerative cellulosic takes natural fabrics such as cotton or other cellulosics and turns it into a virgin-like cellulosic. So as a result, we expect to see a greater share of cellulosics overall in the more circular end state. Regenerative synthetic takes synthetic fabrics such as polyesters, which do make up about 60% of all textiles, and converts them into virgin-like polyester. And then thermomechanical synthetic takes polyesters from other industry sources, the largest one being bottles, so Coke bottles or washing up liquid bottles, and again turns them into virgin-like polyester quality. And then finally, regenerative blended recycling, which is in its early stages, but of course critical, which uses blended fabrics and multicolored textiles and converts them into raw materials. So these all exist. They're at different stages of readiness for scaling. All of them need significant investment allocation, either to improve the quality of the technology or to simply scale up capacity. Next page. Now, critically, all of the main existing recycling technologies are better for the environment across a number of dimensions. So here you can see we compare virgin polyester, cotton, and cellulosics against the recycled versions, and what those overall impacts are on GHG emissions, water use, and land use. And consistently we find that the recycled versions are considerably better. So there's a lot of analytics that sit behind this, and we simplified it into color coding just to make it accessible. But we really did take into a full life cycle of the textiles. Critically, also from the investment lens, these technologies all have the potential to be economical and be better value than virgin. They currently aren't, because they're currently subscale. As I mentioned, only sort of 1% of the textile industry is truly circular currently, and most of that's recycling. But once we get to scale, which provides much better economics on the manufacturing, on the raw materials, by our analysis, both cotton, viscose, and polyester recycling can all be better value and cheaper than virgin. And so our goal as a system is to try and attract investment to these recycling sectors to get to that scale, and to get to the point where it's recycled textiles are a much better option for brands and manufacturers than virgin textiles, both because they're better for the environment and because they're cheaper. So we need to get from this kind of adolescent stage that we're currently at to a mature stage. And then by our estimates, there's an attractive market here, you know, a roughly 100 billion market with a 10 to 20 billion profit margin, if we really scale to the potential that they could be scaled. And this is a lot of what Circular Fashion Partnership is trying to do, is help build these markets, which can create jobs, create value for local economies, and drive the circular economy. And with this, I'll hand back over to Holly, just to, so stepping back, recycling is indispensable to get to a circular textile industry, you know, and a lot of focus goes on circular business models, which are very important around resale and refurbishment, but we really have to scale our recycling capability, and that means both the technologies, the factories to do the recycling, but also the other infrastructure to do the collection and sorting. So it's a critical element. It's better for the environment across a number of considerations, biodiversity as well as greenhouse gas emissions, so we're not just taking a siloed view on climate, and these can create better economic outcomes for the manufacturers and the brands, and create new markets and valuable markets. So all in all, recycling is very exciting and attractive, and we've got to do what we can to scale it up. And I'm going to hand over to Holly to talk about the Circular Fashion Partnership, which is an on-the-ground pre-competitive collaboration, which is doing just that.
Thanks so much, Corinne. So just to quickly introduce, for those who aren't yet familiar with the Circular Fashion Partnership project, this was really a case study that was used to by the McKinsey team also to analyze and to develop the report that we're publishing today, or that we already published this morning. But the Circular Fashion Partnership is really a collaborative initiative to work towards a long-term scalable transition to a circular fashion system. And we set out really looking at a value cycle approach. So seeing how could we collaborate throughout the fashion value chain, or the value cycle, because we want to close it. And how can we look at circularity from a global lens as well? So collaborating both with manufacturing countries and consumption countries. So we developed the project to for the first case, look at Bangladesh, see how we capture and direct post-production fashion waste back into the production of new fashion products, and with an overall goal to see how can we develop the domestic recycling industry in Bangladesh. Another goal was to really create a blueprint for upstream circularity that we can then replicate in other countries. We set out with the project with an ecosystem approach. At the heart of the ecosystem are circular commercial collaborations, which are really collaborations between manufacturers, brands, and recyclers to as I said before, capture post-industrial waste, track it digitally using the reverse resources technology platform to a recycling solution, and then explore how can that recycled material be reintroduced into a new product. So that's the heart of the partnership. The broader partnership is really looking at how can we bring together both the global community of, for instance, fashion brands and innovators with a local community of stakeholders and policymakers, which is absolutely imperative if you're going to look at creating and developing a circular system at a national level as well. So there are lots of different partners involved, and part of this ecosystem, we believe, has to be further developed, but was a good starting point to conduct this analysis. What you can see here is how, using the reverse resources technology platform within the initiative, we've been able to capture waste from manufacturers and map that to recycling. And it's been challenging because we launched this project in the midst of the COVID pandemic, but as you can see, we have been able to increase the volumes. And as we transition more to next year and to the continuation of this project, we're hoping to really deepen the work in Bangladesh. So partnering with more local stakeholders to really capture more waste, hopefully attracting investors to expand recycling capacity domestically and really get the industry up and running there. So something we'll be excited to do with our partners. Besides Bangladesh, in next year, we're looking to see how can we replicate the project. So we're hoping to do preliminary research in Indonesia and in Vietnam. So where we currently stand with the initiative, where we had funding for the project until the end of this year, with Partnership for Growth, we're in the process of applying for a second round of funding with Partnership for Growth to continue on the work, but also with UNIDO, with the Switch to Circular Economy grant, and are absolutely delighted to already have several brands and recycling partners on board to continue this work with us. So a big thank you to Bestseller, H&M Group, Benetton, Inditex with Pull&Bear and Bershka, Primark, and then Target and Kmart in Australia, and of course Cyclo and Usha Yarns. All of these organizations are already committed to further developing the project over the years to come. And with this, I'd like to extend an invitation to everyone joining us today to join this initiative and help us to further develop this work. So now just hand back over to Corinne to touch upon a few of the learnings from this case study for scaling post-industrial recycling.
So, you know, we as sort of watching on the sidelines, McKinsey, I mean, what the fantastic work that Global Fashion Agenda has done, led with Partnership for Good and reverse resources on the ground in Bangladesh, sort of conducted a number of interviews to really understand what has made this effort successful and what are critical ingredients to replicating it or scaling it. And obviously, by definition, a pre-competitive collaboration is multi-stakeholder, but this is incredibly important. What we're trying to do, as I mentioned earlier, is take a very nascent market and accelerate its growth. So we need to bring together the different players. We need to understand the manufacturers, what it takes to help them channel their waste to a recycling facility rather than to the current use cases. We need to understand from the brands what the barriers might be to them to signing up to offtake agreements to buy the output of the recycling. We need to understand what the policy barriers might be. So really having all of those critical actors who are involved in participating in that market involved so that we can help them break down those barriers is absolutely critical. So that's a fundamental design feature. Practically, enabling transparency and tracking, sorry, go back to the previous page, transparency and tracking on the material flows. So this is, again, what we're simply trying to do is open up those flows of waste from manufacturing facilities to channel them to recycling facilities. And we are helping to shed light on the quality of those waste outputs, the quantity, assure that they exist and that they are assuredly being channeled the way they should be channeled. And in many of these nascent markets, these tracking and transparency facilities don't exist. So introducing them is critical, and that's what reverse resources have provided for this project. Thirdly, coordination on the ground, and this sounds quite obvious, but it is critical, particularly because what we're doing here is actually, it's not a blank sheet. there are already existing informal, often, markets dealing with this waste. So often the waste from the manufacturing facilities is already used as fuel in some cases, or channeled for downcycling, for insulation. So there are actors in the informal economy managing that, getting profit or value from it. And in order to help reshape it and include those actors as much as possible, we need really to be well on the ground and embedded in those existing economies. So a program like Circular Fashion Partnership needs the right on the ground actors and representatives to engage with them. It can't be a sort of just engaging with the brands and manufacturers. And finally, one of the other success factors of Circular Fashion Partnership is really creating this strengthened industry voice to a number of different audiences. So it's the brands creating a strengthened voice to the manufacturers, saying that we really want to scale up the amount of recycled material that we use. So help us, let's go on that journey together. It's both the brands and the manufacturers communicating to the policymakers, saying we need some help to unlock, some of the barriers. For example, we need to make sure there's sufficient clean, cheap fuel supplies so that manufacturers aren't incentivized to use their waste as fuel instead of recycling it. So just creating this strengthened voice about the sheer importance of scaling this recycling industry, and also what needs to be done to help address it.
Just jumping in because we're a tiny bit tight on time, Corinne.
Sure. Yeah. Yes.
Would you walk through the barriers and then we quickly end with the
Yeah, just very quickly on the barriers. So, and I've alluded to these already, there's already an existing informal waste management sector. These are individuals whose livelihoods depend on it. It's often sort of operates under the radar. We need to work out how to include them in this transition. Secondly, providing attractive alternatives to current waste. This is recognizing the current incentive set, how waste is used, and make sure we create a more attractive use case for it in recycling. And finally, this assuring demand and supply. So in order for an investment to be made in a recycling facility, they need to know that someone's going to buy that waste at that output, of the recycling, and that there's going to be sufficient feedstock. So just like any marketplace, you need to assure supply and demand. And finally, there's a fantastic opportunity beyond Bangladesh across major textile manufacturing markets to scale this post-industrial recycling. So even though we've been working on the ground in Bangladesh, we'd love to see replications of this across other markets.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And of course, we encourage everyone to download the report. We have an executive summary in there, which is about 2 pages to give you a download of the key messages we just shared. Of course, the full report where you'll see all of our analysis in there as well. So thank you very much to Corinne. I will now hand over to our panel discussion, and delighted to welcome Sourcing and Labour Editor of Sourcing Journal, Jasmin Malik Chua, as our moderator, and she'll be introducing our panelists. So if you'll just give us a second, we'll get everyone up on the screen.
Hi, it's Jasmin. I'm not sure if my camera is working.
It is. Oh. Yeah, everyone's visible and audible.
Oh, great. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to our discussion. I'm Jasmin Malik Chua, and I'm the Sourcing and Labor Editor at Sourcing Journal. I'm delighted to introduce our esteemed panelists. Mumit Hasan, Head of Operations, Bangladesh at Reverse Resources, Sustainable Investment Expert, Irene Maffini, Martin Stenfors, COO of Renewcell, and Sandra Gonza, Circular Fashion Partnership Project Manager at Global Fashion Agenda. Will Corinne be joining us as well?
Yes, I'm here. Yes.
Yes, and everyone knows Corinne now. So I'd love to start with you, Sandra. The report notes that the fashion industry has the potential to become 80% circular by 2030 with the scaling of today's recycling technologies. Why is recycling such a critical piece of the circularity puzzle? And more important, are we accelerating it fast enough?
Thank you, Jasmin, and thank you, Corinne and Holly, before this. So just to start off, I think we know that recycling is only one part of the circularity, or when we're talking about circular economy, but we do really think that it is crucial, especially for the fashion industry. And so when we're talking about the fashion industry specifically, we know that it's a material issue. On one hand, we have the exhaustive use of material resources, heavily relying on virgin materials. And on the other hand, we have the waste that's produced as an output of the production within fashion. And so we really see recycling as the solution that bridges these two issues. Whereas the technologies are scaling, we see a huge opportunity to significantly reduce the demand for virgin materials, which has a huge impact on the emissions, but on the environment as a whole. So I think that answers sort of your first part of the question. But when we go into, are we actually accelerating as fast enough? I think it really is an issue that we're seeing. I think this is also why we started the Circular Fashion Partnership. The technologies do exist and have started to scale, but definitely not at the pace that we need it to. We see that there are many actors involved, both locally, but also brands, manufacturers. There's so many actors that are involved. We think that we do need the collaboration to accelerate and get us to where we need to.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I forgot to mention that we'll be trying to take some questions at the end. So please put them in the Q&A box if you have any, and we'll try to get to them if we have time. Corinne, how can adopting more recycled fibers help brands reach their carbon targets faster? Are there other benefits to using recycled fibers, such as improvements to the company's bottom lines?
Sure. So stepping back, as you identified, most of the big global fashion brands have now set what we call science-based targets to decarbonize, usually across scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, so across their supply chain as well. And the bulk of emissions come from material manufacture and production. So the production of raw material, be it the polyesters or the cottons, and then turning that into yarns and textiles. So anything you can do to extend the use life of a textile, either through reuse or through recycling, has a massive impact on overall GHG emissions. You're essentially eliminating having to go through that phase again for a new textile. So it's a critical piece of the puzzle for decarbonizing. As we mentioned earlier, it's not just good for decarbonizing because polyesters, which are produced mainly from oils, and agricultural-based textiles as well, all have biodiversity impacts in the way they're currently manufactured. So in terms of bottom line, they absolutely can be good for the bottom line, but they aren't yet in general. So we need to really scale up some of these recycling technologies to get them to their potential to be cheaper, essentially, than virgin raw materials. And to be frank, there will almost certainly be a lot of volatility in these markets, because what we're seeing happening is there's an extraordinary awakening going on about the fact that the sector and other sectors need to shift their environmental impacts, which means many companies are making recycling commitments, including CPG companies such as Coke or Unilever. So actually the demand for feedstock for these recyclings, such as PET bottles, is actually exploding, and there's a risk that that then gets quite expensive. So there may well be uncertainty about how some of the prices of these inputs for recycling and then the outputs evolves over time, but absolutely as an end state, it should be better for business.
Absolutely. So we'll get there. Mumit, you're on the ground in Bangladesh. What are the key learnings you've gleaned from CFP, and what remain the biggest barriers to success right now?
Thanks, Jasmin, and thanks everyone for having me. So basically, on the ground perspective, from reverse resources side, we always knew the kind of potential there is in the Bangladeshi market when it comes to having uniform flow of waste, but actually being able to see the amount of scale that can be done is fabulous. And also, when we are thinking on a perspective, or when we are saying it theoretically, how waste can be segregated for making it more suitable for recycling, actually seeing it happening and seeing it that, okay, how easily it can be done is also one of the key learnings of this project, we believe. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I think we, in previous discussions, we mentioned that there are some challenges regarding getting the informal sector on board. Could you elaborate just a little bit on what that entails?
Well, when it comes to the informal sector, of course, as it was being discussed, that waste was or is used to being traded in more of an informal way. So that is kind of present. But what Circular Fashion Partnership has done is actually opened up a pathway for mostly formalizing that sector and trying to get waste being traded in more of a formal way. So it's no longer treated or characterized as waste. It can be characterized as feedstock because what is waste for manufacturers, it's feedstock for recyclers. So yeah, that is also one thing of seeing it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Irene, the next question, I would love to go to you. It seems to me that when it comes to recycling, there's a bigger financing gap than a technology gap. Where is all the money in fashion innovation going right now? And how can projects such as CFP get more funding? Irene, can you hear me? I think
yes, sorry, I was starting to reply, I was still muted. Yeah, thank you for the question. So I think at present, really, like when we look at the recycling technologies, mechanical recycling is really available to recycle textile at scale, but there are huge limitations on this in terms of the quality and the value of the items that we can get. And most actually, applications are around low value items such as industrial blankets or seat padding. And we're seeing now disruptions with advanced chemical recycling across materials and blends. And we have, amazing innovators in this space, such as Renewcell, that is here with us on this panel, that are really pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Basically, when we look at this sort of chemical textile recycling industry, although there are like companies such as kind of Renewcell, Infinity Fiber Company, and others that are really like getting to commercialization stage at the moment, it's still kind of something that will take, I think, this decade to really become established. And we have seen, in the McKinsey report, and Corinne before telling us that with existing mechanical and chemical recycling technologies, if these were scaled also with the infrastructure, we could actually get to 80%, to a fashion sector that is 80% kind of circular. And this is kind of, an amazing thing to kind of refer to. But when we then look at investment, we can see that last year, in 2020, was actually a record year for recycling investment with only 13 deals. This year, we've seen 8. And when we kind of look back actually where the money has gone, this has gone to non-hardware digital businesses, because these type of businesses, returns and risk returns, profiles are very much more in line with established venture capital investors. So this is, so the money has gone to second-hand platforms. Everyone in this audience knows how much, this market has been growing, compared to retail. There are companies such as Real, Vestiaire, Vintage Depop that reach unicorn status. Then on looking at rental, like Rent the Runway kind of leading the way, also kind of became a unicorn. And then a lot of startups that now are trying to do the same with white label solutions, enabling brands to become their own, owning basically their own second-hand or kind of recycling, second-hand or rental kind of platforms. I think the money has also flown quite well into other digital businesses tackling the problem of transparency and traceability. And there are companies that have done quite well in this space, such as Eon, kind of Trust Race, and many others. And and I'm very happy also to report that in the last kind of couple of years, and especially the last year, we've seen a boom in investment actually in material science innovators and synthetic biology applied to textile, which is as well, key together with, I think, recycling to really like close the circular loop. So I think the money has been, progressively flowing more to, non-digital hardware-based businesses that can take a longer time to get to market, but recycling is still challenging because a lot of these companies can take, 20 years from idea stage to commercialization. And this unfortunately falls beyond the capital expenditure, but also the time frame of established VC funds that you usually would get involved Series A stage and look at an exit event within sort of like 5 to kind of 7 years. So I think there's definitely a lot more that can be done in this area, but promising news that the deals, have been increasing in this space.
Yeah. Corinne, did you have anything to add about the investment gap in the report?
Just this piece around, reiterating this piece around when investors are analyzing a market, they always want assurance that there's a significant enough customer for it who really needs it and you're really solving a problem for them, and that the inputs are there or the waste is there. And so that's why partnerships such as the Circular Fashion Partnership are so critical, because we need more of these proof points. We need to prove to the investors there is absolutely the demand and there is absolutely the feedstock and it is of quality. And here's a mini case example of this ecosystem working in practice. So just filling that information gap as much as anything. Yeah,
wonderful.
Jasmin, if I can add just a point also, fully agreeing with Irene that, I mean, in order to make this happen in reality, investment has to go into CapEx investment into actual hardware, doing the actual recycling, so to say. And I mean, these kind of projects take quite a long time to build new plants and are fairly CapEx intensive. So I do understand the sort of trend of making less investment into digital platforms, but if recycling is actually going to scale, the CapEx investment into manufacturing plant has to happen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Martin. And the next question really goes to you. Most of the promising technologies like Renewcell are in the West, while the areas of production are in the global South, sorry, which may not always have the infrastructure to incorporate them. How do we reconcile these two spheres?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question. And I mean, a company like Renewcell is built on several hundreds of years of tradition in Sweden of producing pulp and paper manufacturing. All our founders have that background. Mm. So, I mean, for us, it was natural, and it's natural to sort of continue to build on that legacy when we build our first new large-scale production plant. 60,000 metric tons, planned to start up the second quarter next year. So there are some encouraging, I mean, some scaling of the technology is happening now, but I agree with all former speakers that it has to accelerate and has to happen quicker. But to give you a couple of sort of key takeaways on what's important for us, at least when we sort of make an investment decision to build a new plant, I mean, first and foremost is access to stable and renewable energy at a low cost. These processes are energy intense, not as intense as producing dissolving pulp that we produce from virgin resources, but still it requires a lot of energy. The plant that we're building will run 24/7 for 350 days out of the full year. So, I mean, stable energy supply is absolutely key, but also to have access on bio-based fuels for boilers generating steam, for instance, which also is super important for our LCA calculations. When it comes to also the sort of ease of doing business and trade barriers, in some countries in South Asia, I mean, you have a lot of trade barriers when it comes to trading in textile waste and in secondhand clothing and so on to protect the domestic textile production. But this causes problems also for us. I mean, if we would invest in a plant in a specific country, obviously we need to be able to source feedstock into that plant with a sort of low barrier, trade barrier kind of environment. So I guess those are sort of the main topics that from our point of view is really important. In the long term, obviously, we in our scaling plans, we want to try to regionalize the supply chain as much as possible. To be able to utilize waste more in a regional fashion and also send our product, the dissolving pulp, to more regional fiber producers to reduce the sort of logistics and environmental footprint.
Yeah, Mumit, I'd love to hear from you what your take is on the infrastructure and the energy piece of this puzzle.
Of course, as Martin was saying, this is really important for recyclers to have a steady flow of energy, and when making such an investment before that feasibility and during the feasibility analysis stage. What is very important is also, I believe, a steady flow of raw materials, and that is very much going to be possible, that can be made very much possible by investing in areas which have enough post-industrial waste, or that kind of category of waste that is more capable to be transformed into recycled material. And when it comes to energy, of course, if a certain business case, or if a certain business case is presented, I believe that can be made possible with enough lobbying to the certain key stakeholders in the government. Thank you.
So one of our questions is, if you would have the budget available to push this case study in Bangladesh further, what would or should be your priority? Does anybody want to take that one?
I'll start, but I'm sure everyone will add. There's absolutely a piece around the policy enablers. And, in an environment like Bangladesh, where the textile industry is significant for the economy, there's a good alignment of incentives for the government to want to support the health of that economy and it being competitive on the international stage, and international companies wanting to continue procuring from Bangladeshi manufacturers. But there's a whole lot of specific problems to be solved, so to speak, which policy can help with. One was, again, this informal economy, which I mentioned, helping the policymakers essentially enforce existing regulation around waste streams, mandating new regulation around waste streams and what they're used for, as the EU is doing. Again, in investing in alternative infrastructure, such as this problem of a lot of cotton waste being used as fuel. Okay, well, how do we create a more attractive alternative to cotton for fuel? Well, we need to invest in that also as a market. So there's a whole lot of little problems to be solved, big problems to be solved in some cases, where the government's actually quite important to help. And that's why, policymakers have been involved in this effort, and it's critical that they continue to be. Mm-hmm. Would anyone else add anything?
Yeah, I'd just like to jump in as well, just looking at what we've been doing with the Circular Fashion Partnership. I think for us, it would really be scaling the work that we've already been doing. So far, we've captured some of the volume, and we've had quite a bit of impact despite COVID, the COVID pandemic. But I think being able to scale the volumes, onboard more manufacturers to be able to trace that waste, whilst also looking at how can it be more equitable. So I think Corinne touched upon the informal sector, but how can we have a win-win business case to incorporate, let's say, this informal sector to actually benefit from formalizing and building these infrastructure? If we're able to onboard more manufacturers, capture more waste, scale the project that we already are working on, we can find ways to also incorporate the sections of the informal sector. And so, yeah, I think that's from my side.
And a comment from me here also, I mean, if you look at scaling, I mean, that's super crucial. And from a demand point of view, when it comes to textile waste / feedstock, I mean, with the scale up that we're doing, in about 9 to 12 months time, we will consume about 5,500 to 6,000 metric tons of feedstock into our new plant every month. So if you compare that to sort of the volumes that have been collected and sort of sorted in this project so far, I mean, on the supply side, it could be sort of full steam ahead scaling that because the demand is there.
Wonderful. Mumit, the Bangladesh project currently focuses on post-industrial waste. How much of a bigger challenge is tackling post-consumer waste? And how can the lessons of the Circular Fashion Partnership serve as a springboard for addressing that problem?
Thank you for this question. Well, when it comes to post-consumer waste, that is more trickier feedstock to navigate through in comparison to post-industrial waste, which is fairly standardized. In Bangladesh, Bangladesh is more of a production-oriented country. So we are producing, we're more on the production side when it comes to the large brands. Not many brands have retail shops in Bangladesh. So of course, when it comes to post-industrial waste, I think the idea when it comes to post-consumer waste, as it is a bit more trickier, and post-industrial waste is so much readily available in Bangladesh. Of course, currently the visibility is less, but it can be scaled. And if the post-industrial waste landscape can be scaled to such extent that the recyclers have enough of post-industrial capacity, and through that, eventually it's much easier, it's going to be much easier to transition into post-consumer rather than starting from it when there are less raw material available and it itself being a more trickier raw material to handle. So I think that can be added, that if we can start scaling with post-industrial, reach a certain level, and then eventually transition into post-consumer, I think that can be a very nice way forward. Yeah.
Absolutely. So Martin, how important is it not just to get investor support, but also, government buy-in, especially if we're to expand recycling efforts across different countries which have, different laws?
As I said earlier, also, I mean, to have that sort of stable and predictable infrastructure, if it's sort of electricity generation and distribution, or if it's wastewater treatment or logistics, that's super important to have a sort of stable industrial environment to operate in. Also, when it comes to protection of intellectual property, I mean, most of these, our colleagues and ourselves, we are sort of startup companies with sort of intellectual property into our processes and how we operate and work. So, I mean, that is obviously always a concern when you think about putting a factory in a certain geography or region, that there is strong protection for intellectual property, but also that there is a sort of predictable process when it comes to getting environmental permits and other operational permits that are needed in a country. So it doesn't become a sort of a process that can sort of take a long time. So the rules and the sort of what's expected when it comes to these processes are crystal clear from the start. That will help from a legislation point of view.
Yes. And Sandra, we frequently talk about the importance of collaboration, especially pre-competitive collaboration. How vital is it in this case?
Yeah, thank you, Jasmin. And so, I mean, what we've learned from the Circular Fashion Partnership in the last 18 months is really, it's quite complex. There's so many different actors, and bringing them together, getting that collaboration going is really going to be key to really moving that pin. And so I'd say there's two parts when we say within the Circular Fashion Partnership, we have the demand side, which is the recyclers, this need for this waste, but also the feedstock, the availability of this waste. I think in collaboration, what the Circular Fashion Partnership has done is brought these two together, connected the two to actually collaborate and be able to hopefully make recycled materials more competitive to virgin materials. And so collaboration in this sense is really imperative to actually hopefully reducing the environmental impact that that virgin materials do have currently.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. I'm afraid that's all the time that we have right now. I'm handing it back to you, Holly.
Fantastic. And a huge thanks to you, Jasmin, for joining us and moderating this discussion today. And of course, to all of the experts joining us for this panel. And we now hand over to a special guest to provide a closing note on the session today. I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Faiyaz Murshid Kazi, the Director General for West Europe and the European Union at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Bangladesh. And we're delighted to have you, sir. And once we get the video up and running, we'll be handing over to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Sorry, thank you, Holly. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I start with a note of apologies. I mean, we were supposed to have a conversation last week, which I missed, and I'm very sorry about that. It was, again, as usual, a very interesting discussion. And the more I was listening to all of you, I realized how little I actually understand this topic. I was trying to read up the confidential report that you had shared, and it also highlighted the challenges for a layperson like me. So I would just limit myself without betraying my ignorance to saying that we remain interested in this project. I mean, from the government side, I think, including from our political leadership, we did indicate that we would like to take it forward. But again, we have no illusion that there would be layers of challenges and complications from different actors that we will have to work through and navigate. And as I just saw somewhere, I mean, as a first mover, probably we would have to brace ourselves for facing certain disadvantages. I'm happy to see that the point we have been trying to make about onboarding the informal sector in the waste management process is being taken into consideration in the whole mapping exercise that's being done. Because again, let us be very clear, without having this critical group of actors owning this process, it would be kind of difficult for us as well to push it through. Secondly, I think our industry has been showing their readiness to participate in this endeavor. But lately, what we are gathering from them, that they may also have certain concerns, which again, need not be intractable as such. We would think that having a bit more transparent and informed discussions with them would probably help sort out some of the issues that may be outstanding. On the policy side, I have listened to some of the comments, and I would again perhaps repeat myself that we do understand that there are certain issues that need to be addressed, but as it happens, we may not be able to address them all at same go. But that's why we have been asking for kind of a mapping exercise of where the gaps are and what could be probably the lower hanging fruits compared to the more difficult ones to address right at this point. If we could have a clearer understanding from the concerned experts about that, then it would definitely prove to be easier for us to push it through. Again, I myself had an opportunity to be in Glasgow for 2 days while our Prime Minister was there. And we could very much see on the venue, there is this buzz being created around circularity about fast fashion and so forth. This may not have featured prominently in the COP26 outcomes as such, but there is no reason why it should not gather further traction and gain momentum and get mainstreamed into the COP conversations. And as we like to say from Bangladesh, we have taken lead on many climate adaptation efforts without making a big noise about it. This is probably another frontier where we can try to showcase some work going forwards. Again, not without making a lot of noise, but of course by managing and working together with all different actors. So there again, we remain engaged, and we would very much like to see other countries joining us in this partnership. There are other textile producing countries, garments manufacturing countries, which do have huge potentials to contribute in this conversation from their different vantage points. And it would definitely add to our strength if we can exchange notes with other comparable contexts and take this thing forward. So on that very abstract note, I think I would conclude here, and thank you very much again for making us part of this conversation. I promise to go through the report more intelligently so I can comprehend it better, and where I would be stuck, I know who to knock at, including Holly, yourself, to add to some clarity. So let the conversation going. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today and for also sharing your guidance on how we can direct ourselves moving forward. I appreciate the invitation to expand the project to other countries as well. So with that, I rests only to just thank the Director General, Jasmin, all of our expert panelists, and of course the team at McKinsey who helped us to create this report. Also all of the partners and participants in the Circular Fashion Partnership who've been working really hard to actually develop this project and to prove a case study for further scaling. We will be sharing a publication of this recording after the meeting. And of course, you can go to globalfashionagenda.com or circularfashionpartnership.com to learn more and to download the reports. Thank you also for all of the questions that have come in. And for those that we weren't able to answer live, we'll do our best to reply per email. So thank you all, and looking forward to continuing this work together. Take care. Goodbye.